Hey there, race fans. Welcome to another episode of the Inside Line. I'm your co-host, Nathan Brown, Indy Stars Motorsports Insider, here with my co-host, Joey Barnes, and we're here to chat about everything regarding the Long Beach Grand Prix, IndyCar's third stop on its 17-race season. A lot of on-track achievements, big picture topics, a lot of on-track things or off-track things going on as well. We'll have the IMS Open test here in a little bit more than a week, and our conversations will start to shift towards the month of May, and if anyone can dethrone Joseph Newgarden at the Indy 500. But for now, plenty to talk about coming home from Southern California. Joey, we saw someone finally prove that someone not named Alex Palou can win a race in this 2025 IndyCar season. Kyle Kirkwood gets his third race win in IndyCar in his 4 seasons, and his second on the streets of Long Beach. What stood out to you in watching Kyle Kirkwood finally not only dethrone Alex Palou, but fend him off over those closing laps and get that win there on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, it first and foremost, finally got racing back again, right? It's like 3 races in the first 2 months now. This was a real masterclass by Kirkwood on a lot of different levels. I don't know if it's just his adaptation to Long Beach. I don't know if it's just sometimes drivers just take the tracks a certain way, or if this is just the continued ascension and we should probably expect more of this throughout the year. But it felt like almost similar to the way that Pato drove last year at Mid-Ohio, where it was a head-to-head against Palou, and he had to put on a really mature drive to execute that. This felt something similar. And, with this, I mean, it's not just that he barely hung on and Palou was charging on him. I mean, he was gapping Palou at the end of that race and made the most of that. So I thought considering how wonky the tire strategy was and how, I mean, there were comers and goers and you didn't necessarily know you were going to be on the preferred strategy until really it shook out at the end, because you didn't know if we would get a caution that ultimately never came. So it was a really good drive out of that 27 Andretti bunch. Really great drive out of Kirkwood. I'm going to be fascinated to see if this can translate moving forward to Barber. Obviously, Kirkwood's shown pace at the Indy 500, and either ended up upside down in the fence or finishing in the top 10. So it's going to be kind of fascinating to see what can happen with this team moving forward. And I mean, look, we talked about it in our last show. It's going to take some really Herculean drives if you want to best Alex Palou and dethrone him, right? He's a back-to-back champ for a reason. He's won 3 of the last 4 years for a reason. He's opened up the first 2 races this year with wins for a reason. And it's going to take drives like this, not just consistency, but literally Palou's second, and this is his worst drive of the year. It's going to take more of these things in order to have the opportunity for someone else to be champ this year.
And I think the really important part of that is that it's not just going to take more drives like this from the entire field, but it's going to take lots of drives like this from the same driver. We saw last year, Alex Palou doesn't win. Chip Ganassi Racing doesn't even win in the back half of the season. I think it was after Laguna Seca, so I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was either the final 8 or final 9 races of the year. Chip Ganassi Racing goes winless. Alex Palou only wins 2 points-paying races on the year and still finishes more than 30 points clear of the rest of the field. And the way he was able to do that is he was racking up podiums and top fives. Had that issue at Iowa where he spun in his own, the first, I would say, notable mistake from Alex that we've seen, other than maybe signing contracts that he doesn't want to live up to in the last couple years. And, you've got Colton winning a race, winning a race or two here or there. You've got Scott McLaughlin winning a race. You've got Pato winning a race, Power winning a race, Joseph Newt winning a race. But when there's 5 or 6 guys that are winning races, but none of them is winning 3 or 4 of them over that back half of that stretch, that's why you saw Alex Palou's gap to the field never really shrink to a worrisome level. And so, it's great that Kirkwood was able to do this. And fabulous that we got to see another driver win a race, another team win a race. We've got a really interesting mix of folks at the top of the points right now that we'll get to in a second. But if Alex Palou is going to have any threat to him to win this championship, someone else entirely is going to have to take it upon themselves and go toe to toe with Alex. His closest competitor right now, Kyle Kirkwood, is 34 points back in 3 races. I don't know what Kyle's gap was after 2, but Kyle obviously cut more than 10 points off of what his gap was going into Long Beach to Alex. So, whoever it is, whether it's one of the 3 Team Penske drivers who's sitting outside the top 5 right now, whether it's Alex's teammate, whether it's one of the couple strong drivers so far from Andretti or from Arrow McLaren, we're going to have to see someone take it upon themselves and say, I am going to go. I think the broadcast said it when we were talking about Kirkwood. They said he put on a Palou-like performance on Sunday, and we're going to have someone have a Palou-like season if Alex Palou isn't hoisting the Astor Cup again once we get to the season finale in Nashville.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Like, we as media and a lot of fans, parity is fun, right? You want to see there's 17 races. You'd love to see, 15, 16, 17 different race winners. And everyone in this field has the capability of winning races, right? Like, any of the 27 drivers and teams in the field has the capability of winning 33 when you include the 500. And I think the thing that's kind of funny is the parity is what is going to plague the possibility of beating Palou. It's going to take, and I know that this isn't necessarily a comp that probably a lot of people want to hear, but in order to take your best shot at Max Verstappen in F1, you had to do something to isolate the Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris situation. And just one small hiccup with that, and we saw how effectively that did not pan out, right? And now it's a little bit more parity to start the year for them on the F1 side. But I don't think that you can take that same approach here. Like, I think it's going to have to be isolated. Like, we talk about, Kirkwood, Palou, Lundgaard, Felix, Will Power finishing in the top 5 for Long Beach. And you look at how that's situating with the points. And like you touched on, Kirkwood being 34 back. We got Christian Lundgaard and Felix Rosenqvist and Scott Dixon and Pato. That's your top 5. And that's a 142 to 80 point spread. So 62 point gap between those 6. And what is it, 52 for race weekend?
So it's 50 points for the win. Obviously, in order to win, you have to lead at least 1 lap. So then there you get your minimum 51, and then you get your point possibly for pole and 2 points possible for leading the most laps.
Yeah. So and you can look at Colton in 7th at 69 back, but you're already talking about a full race gap, right? That's just. It's absurd. We're 3 races into the season and we're already talking about a 3 race gap. And I know that Palou didn't win 3 in a row like Dixon did back in 2020 to start the year. And Dixon was untouchable that year for all intents and purposes. So I think, like we've touched on several times, and I joked about it over the weekend watching the race, is just Palou feels like this feels like a Marvel movie, right? This feels like Palou is Thanos and everyone else is the Avengers trying to figure out how to group together. And if you take the gemstones as wins, it's how do we keep the gemstones away from Palou? But it does feel like that. And I think that you're going to have, like you said, and we've touched on several times, it's going to have to be one guy that steps up from it's going to take a program rallying around one guy. And I don't know if you can afford to wait till the Indy 500 and then figure out where you are and then put all your eggs in one basket. I kind of wonder if you've got to do that going into the 500, knowing that Palou hasn't proved that he can win on an oval yet. We all know he's fully capable, having finished runner-up in the 500 in 2021 and set on pole there a couple of years ago. The speed on the ovals is not the problem. It's just a matter of finishing it out. But I don't know that you can wait. I think you got to go now. Obviously, with a gap like this and a full race in hand on a healthy amount of the field, I think you got to go now. And whether that means, Aaron McLaren says, we got Pato and Christian, and we've got to figure out what that looks like going into May. With Andretti, you got Kirkwood and Herta. You got to figure that out. And, Felix being part of the CGR program there loosely with the Meyer-Shank Racing affiliation, technical alliance. I'll be fascinated to see where that kind of sits, because he's having a great start to the year. So,
yeah, I mean, Felix is someone that is almost like if you're Ganassi. I mean, maybe it's too early to say this. I would love Felix to prove me wrong and make me look really silly at the end of the year, but I think you assume he's probably not going to go and win a championship this year. So if you are Chip Ganassi Racing and Meyer-Shank Racing, that technical alliance that you have is like another bullet. Felix is your guy that's, if you can go and win a race, great. But we need you up as high as possible to, not be a blocker, but to take up points that otherwise guys like, Colton Herta, Joseph Newgarden, Scott McLaughlin, Will Power, all guys that finished behind Felix in the race on Sunday otherwise would have had. He's for all intents and purposes, when we're looking at this championship, Felix Rosenqvist is a lot more like a teammate to Alex Palou than he is a competitor. I pulled up the F1 standings from last year. It's really ironic when we were talking about the Max Verstappen comparison that you made, and I don't think you're far off in that. So in the final, I think I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So final 14 races of the F1 championship last year. Max Verstappen won just 2 of them, but you got wins from Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz. Like, all of those guys are winning a couple races here and there. I think you had George Russell, Lewis Hamilton. So when you have 6 other guys that are winning races, Max had to do was win 2 races, and no one was going out and taking the championship from him. And that's basically what we saw last year from Alex Palou. The tough thing with IndyCar is you don't it's never spoken about publicly. You don't hear teams talk about, hey, we're putting all of our efforts into Will Power going out and winning this race for Team Penske because he's our best shot. It would, I know the talk came up. It was a couple years ago. I don't remember the year is slipping my mind, but you had to talk about team orders a couple years ago with just a few races to go in the championship. Was that Will Power's championship season? Does that sound right?
I think it was 22. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was we don't hear that talk often. But I mean, what we're thinking about here when you make the F1 comparison is would you actually have a team tell, say, Joseph Newgarden or Scott McLaughlin or Will Power, let's use Team Penske, for example, say guys are second and third, or, I mean, hell, even first and second. I mean, that would be, I think, even more controversial. But are you actually going to have a driver with Team Penske who's, virtually out of championship contention, just give up a position so that their teammate, without merit, can get 5 more points and go hunt down Alex Palou down the stretch? IndyCar just doesn't really operate that way. I think as long as guys are mathematically in the championship, they are going to fight tooth and nail because they don't want to give up an opportunity to pull off a miracle and go win a championship. So I don't, until guys are really mathematically out of it, I don't know that you will see, at least I'm sure there's drivers that will push really hard against that, because as a driver, you're always going to be super confident that you can go out and do your best and pull off the impossible the next race weekend out there. So it will be really interesting to see if we get into that A-B driver talk, because you're going to have, at some point, if you're one of these teams, you're going to have one driver that's going out and doing your best. If Colton Herta and Kyle Kirkwood are both winning 3 races this year, but one of them, instead of one winning 5 and the other winning 1, for example, I don't know if that's enough to go and beat Alex Palou, unless you are also matching him in the number of top 5s and podiums that you have. And so far, these last several seasons, we have seen clearly that no one can do that. And the only time someone did, it was Will Power, who won just a single race, and also proved how important that consistency is, and the fact that you could win a championship with just a single race win.
Yeah, no, 100%. And look, I mean, I know people who are listening to us are like, "Oh, what the hell are you talking about? We don't want team orders, and we don't want team orders either."
No,
I mean, it's just. But Alex Palou and his performance, and that number 10 team and their performance, is pushing the groupthink to make you wonder, is that what it's going to take? I mean, that's literally, I think, all we're trying to say with this. And I think to go back to just briefly to touch on what you brought up, the Verstappen stats. It's not that winning is still hugely important, right? I mean,
yes.
It's an extra 10 points or 12 points that are available there. But it's just the fact that Alex Palou podiums the field to death. He top 5s the field to death. And you're going to have an average finish of like 4.2 on the season. At this rate, you might have to have a 1.8 if this continues with Palou's performance. But at some point, you think there's going to be a dip. It's obnoxious. It's absurd. But, it is what it is. And this is just the reality. Is this is going to force teams and drivers' hands on how to maximize their season. And it might have to come from team orders. But I don't want to deviate too much from the race. I wanted to pick your brain on a couple of things, race related, just to go back there before we move on. Is, how do we feel about the alternate primary tire combination? Because I'm sitting here looking at the tire selection for the race weekend, and it's proven that the alternate tires, obviously, as always, you want them in qualifying. But man, guys are so quick to get off of them whenever the race starts. And like, if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 guys that started on the harder primaries that were able to convert that to still finish in the top 10, the highest being Lundgaard in third. But I look at, for instance, Joseph Newgarden's strategy of starting the race on alternates, fresh alternates. The first 2 laps, he's off of them. And he's in the pits, he's diving the pits, he's coming out, he's getting clear racetrack, and he's on the harder primaries. But he's also, and Fox did a good job with this of targeting him and showing how he's forcing other guys' hands to potentially pit early. And obviously it came undone with a seatbelt issue that we can talk about in a minute with Joseph. But for this race to be 5 laps longer than it was last year, to come in after only 2 laps, to try to hit a really aggressive fuel number, but still push the pace enough to force other people's hands. Maybe the raceability wasn't quite what we expected, but certainly the strategy made it incredibly interesting. And because of the unique tire strategy, there was some really tight racing on the track. But it's really evident now. We've got 2 street races in with St. Pete being the other, that these alternates shred apart quick. So it feels like everything moving forward, unless something changes, it feels like every street race we're going to, we're 100% trying to get off the alternates as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So what I learned from being on the ground on this race weekend, I don't know if it was ever really said too much publicly, but this was, from what I understand, I think whether it was an identical or with very, very minor alterations, the alternate tire that we saw this weekend at Long Beach was the same tire that Firestone brought to St. Pete. Long Beach as a surface from what I understand from talking to drivers, is a little bit less abrasive. And so that's why you saw guys able to, even though we didn't see much of it, from that first stint, but guys, I guess the guys that didn't start on alternates and hop off of them immediately, you saw guys able to, put together 8, I'm looking at the Firestone thing right now, 7, 8, 9, 10 laps on those alternates. So it wasn't like you did 5 laps and you could do no more than that. You could do more than that. It wasn't advantageous to do that. I think from my perspective, and maybe some folks disagree, I think the way Firestone hit the discrepancy at thermal, I think was really close to being really spot on. I think the primary tires were solid. They could last a stint. They got you maybe a little bit more longevity, but they weren't as fast. And the alternates had some peaky top speed, but they were, I'm probably not going to quite use the right words, but they didn't just shred. They wore, but they were able to last 10, 15, 20 laps, and you were still getting some good speed out of them, something to the effect of kind of like once you get that outer layer of them off, the tire is still holding up, and it's still able to give you some speed, but probably not the length of a stint that you see in the primaries. Now, thermal was a red race. That was ultimately the best tire to use as much as possible for that race, and you're things are always going to work out where it's either a black race, black tires are better to use for more stints, or red is going to be better. It's never going to be, you're never going to have a situation, I don't think, where either is better, or you could pick both and still have a good shot at winning the race. There's going to be one that you want, but I think it's good if you have situations where the decision is a little bit tougher than what we've seen over these first couple of street races. I mean, it was just very clear that you wanted to use primaries. So I hope, as you mentioned, in street races, the rest of the calendar, we've got Detroit and Toronto. I think those are the only two that are coming to mind. I hope the tire situation is a little bit different, where you could have an alternate that could last a little bit longer, maybe get into the 15 lap range, and you start to wonder, do we try to stretch a stint on those reds? I think at that point you probably start to have the decisions on, do you start on blacks? Do you start on reds? Do you start on used reds? We see a difference of strategy kind of akin to what we saw at thermal, where you had guys starting on primaries, you had guys, Pato Award, for example, starting on new alternates. You had Christian Lundgaard, I think, starting on used alternates. It's just, we love strategy. This car is so, we talk about it again and again and again. There's very little about this car that is going to make teams stand out. And so often it's about hitting this tire strategy, rolling the dice, frankly, a little bit, getting some luck, and having your strategy be the one that makes sense to how the race pans out. For example, a race that had no cautions throughout its entirety, the second race in a row for that. But I think strategy, what I'm getting at in a long-winded way, we love to see strategy make a difference in the races. And they did a little bit the last couple, not maybe as much so at St. Pete, except for the few really curious decisions on some folks to start on primaries instead of alternates, that I don't think, frankly, made a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, that's why this win for Kirkwood was so impressive. It wasn't just a great drive from him. It wasn't just great pit stops. It also took good strategy calls across the board from his group. Brian Herta on top of his stand as his strategist, and all across Andretti Global. So hopefully we see more of that. The next race on the calendar, we've got 2 permanent road courses at Barber and the IMS road course. So we'll see what Firestone brings. Those races last year, of course, still were run without the hybrid. So we'll see what Firestone has in store from a tire standpoint. But as you mentioned, really interested to see how tire strategy can pan out and make a difference the rest of the year.
Before we talk about a couple of the good performances, because there's one really good performance that we've got a fun little potential debate on the table. But before we'll table that just for a moment. But I touched on Joseph Newgarden pitting after 2 laps from the alternates to the primaries and trying to maximize a fuel number that ultimately was still in question. And this is after we know about a fuel number that was an issue in St. Pete. And now he had a seatbelt issue later in the race that ultimately took him out. It derailed the entire race, right? And this is I don't know how to be nice about this, but I'm trying to be, is if you go back to Nashville last year, this is the second time with the second different driver that there's been a seatbelt issue. So 2 times in 4 races. And then separately than that, this is 2 times in the last 3 races that there's been a fuel number issue needing to be hit for just Joseph with St. Pete. Like I know we talked about this on the season preview show of how Penske typically doesn't make mistakes. It's usually Ganassi and it's Penske, and then the Andrettis and the McLarens are usually that second tier, because usually there's 1 or 2 incidents or issues that keep them from breaking that glass ceiling to turning this into ultimately a 3-horse race. There's regression right now. I mean, there's no other easy way to say it. They have pace. Scott McLaughlin is bad fast. Will Power is bad fast, and Joseph's bad fast. But if it's not a qualifying miscue where they've got to charge from 23rd to 5th, if there's not a seatbelt issue, like there's just something that continues to falter to where this team is the good results, the good performances are escaping their clutches for whatever reason. And I don't necessarily know what the hell's going on with it, but something's amiss.
I agree. I'm trying to pull up Joseph. Hearing you talk about Joseph there, I was curious to figure out when his last pole on a non-oval was. It looks like it was 2020. Oh, nope, 2022 at Detroit. Hearing you talk about McLaughlin and Power, and Joseph. I mean, part of it that stands out to me, but even before we get to the race weekend, is we don't see these. I mean, frankly, outside of Scott McLaughlin's been Team Penske's best qualifier the last couple of years. I don't think it's really even much of a debate, but we don't see Joseph and Will Power often enough in these fast 6s to help position yourself in a good spot once these races get going. You occasionally have someone come from, Alex Palou, I think, is a great example. I think he might have started 8th at St. Pete and was able to work his way up partially on strategy, partially on speed in his race car to get to the front when the time counted. But more often than not, we're seeing these Team Penske drivers really scratching their heads when we get out of qualifying. Scott McLaughlin was able to put it in the fast 6, and I think he started 6th, and he finishes somewhere 4th, 5th, or 6th, I think, this race weekend. So a solid rebound for him. He was 6th. Yeah. Solid rebound after his DNF of 27th at Thermal Club. But I mean, it's just in this field that is so tight. When if you're not McLaughlin, if you're Joseph and Will Power, his 2 teammates, starting 13th and 15th is just puts such a additional level of difficulty on your race weekend come Sunday, just to even get into the top 5 when this field is so deep. You've got a list of at minimum 12 drivers that really would not surprise you if they went out and won a race, and probably a list of 16 or 17 that wouldn't make you fall out of your chair if they won a race. Not
to cut you off, but yeah, I'll throw you something kind of wild here. When's the last time that you can remember the first 3 races of the season, or any 3-race stretch in any season, and 3 different drivers for Roger Penske's team finished 26th or worse in all three races. I mean, Will finished 26th at St. Pete. You just touched on McLaughlin with 27th at Thermal and 27th for Joseph at Long Beach. I mean, I don't remember the last time that's happened. I don't know if I've ever said that in a sentence.
I know that kind of been on the back of my mind, and now seems like there's a story to be written about that, I think, at some point. Yeah, it's just been a very curious start to the year. And this is like, we go back to the Alex Palou conversation. This is just something you cannot have when you are battling Alex Palou. And frankly, it's even worse that it happened to all three of their drivers in one instance, because that's a weekend that you get 5 points. When Alex Palou is either finishing second and getting 40 points, or winning a race and getting 51, 2, 3, what have you. It's just something you cannot have if you want to best Chip Ganassi Racing and Alex Palou in their current form. Team, there's still 14 races. We have a lot of ovals left on the calendar. We know that Team Penske is going to have the upper hand, at least from what we've seen, unless Chip Ganassi Racing comes out and proves us otherwise. Love to see it if that's the case, but we know that there's a half dozen ovals or so on the calendar left that Team Penske can pick up some races. But it's not like Alex Palou is going and finishing 10th at Iowa and saying, well, that's the best we could do. He was on the podium last year at Iowa and probably would have had 2 if he had not crashed himself in race 1. So there's a lot of questions to be answered at that organization as we get ready to a really busy month of May, where you have 3 races and you have qualifying for the 500. We're on track every single weekend of the year, and you got Detroit immediately following it. This is a very key moment, not for Team Penske, but for the entire rest of the field that are not named Alex Palou. You have 4 races in 5 weekends, and you also have qualifying for the Indy 500. I think if you are someone who expects to be challenging Alex Palou for a championship, you cannot go these 4 weekends without winning at least 1 race. You cannot get to 7 races of the end of the year and not have a win yet. When you are at this point, we're talking virtually everyone is at least 50 points back, except for Christian Lundgaard and Kyle Kirkwood.
Yeah, 100%. And, I guess with that, we'll slide over. That's the bad, right? But let's slide over to the good. Kyle Kirkwood obviously off to the best start of his career through the first 3 races with 2 top 5s, one of those being the win, and then I think an 8th at St. Pete. So a strong start to the year for him to be second in the standings. But we got to talk about the guy that's third in the standings, Christian Lundgaard. Signed over from RLL. We know that he's well regarded as a mega talent in this paddock. There's still questions that remain about his oval prowess that I think they'll be answered very soon. Yep. But this guy, he's led 49 laps to start the year, which is, looking at it, not even kidding, he's led more laps than anybody this year, including Palou and Kirkwood. Sorry, Pato's got 51. So my bad, I missed on that. So his teammate, combined, they've got 100 laps led on the season. So you look at this, and Christian's opened up with an 8th place finish at St. Pete. Mind you, it was Kirkwood got the 5th at St. Pete, the 8th at Thermal. So I had that backwards. But Christian also has back-to-back 3rd place finishes. And I mean, as much as we like Alexander Rossi, this is who he replaced. He has as many podiums as in 3 races with Arrow McLaren as Alexander Rossi had in 2 years with Arrow McLaren. And I mean, look, it's early days, but that's a hell of a start for a team that, for a long time, no matter how much they've expanded with 2 cars, 3 cars, whatever, it always felt like it was one big bullet in the chamber, and it was Pato. Now, I think you've got to wonder, is Pato the biggest bullet in the chamber? No.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't want to make any overarching decisions off of the first 3 races of the year, but I think it's very clear that at minimum, this team has 2 drivers now that it knows without if Now, I might have to couch this. Now, if this team has a car that can go and win a race on a weekend, it can give the car to both of these drivers and they can go out and challenge for a race win. We are still seeing times where Arrow McLaren puts a car on track and it's the results are just a little curious. They didn't have a car in St. Pete that could challenge for a race win. Frankly, I mean, Christian wasn't probably quite fast enough to challenge for a win this past weekend in Long Beach. Clearly that team still has some work to do on its street course program to get that to where it needs to be. But Pato now finally has a driver. I won't say yet if Christian is truly his match, because again, we've just seen 3 races so far. I want to wait until a couple more weekends down the road. But I mean, Christian is right up there in qualifying with him, outqualified him significantly in St. Pete and was right there both in Long Beach and in Thermal. He's had better finishes in 2 of the 3 races that Pato has. And I think it's a significant development for this team, because I think what Arrow McLaren has been lacking, as great as you mentioned, as an engineering mind and a teammate and a veteran that Alexander Rossi was for his 2 years with this team, we saw Alex so rarely up there really challenging for wins. And we haven't, minus his IMS Road Course win in 2022 in his final season with Andretti Autosport, then now Andretti Global. Felix had some strong performances here and there in his 3 seasons with Arrow McLaren. We haven't seen someone be seemingly as consistently capable of being in the top 5 or the top 3 challenging for poles and wins as Christian Lundgaard has so far. You had a great stat that I will let you, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but you mentioned that Christian Lundgaard has had back-to-back podiums in his first 3 races with Arrow McLaren. What did you dig up on how that stacks up to Pato Award's previous top-performing teammates over the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, yeah, with Rossi, it was Rossi had 2 podiums throughout his entire Arrow McLaren term. And you had the Felix stat.
Felix had 3 in 3 years. Yeah, I think one in year 2 and 2 in year 3. It took Felix a good bit to get up to speed finally once he got through his rocky first year with the team.
What I tell you this is, with those, I'm seeing a situation where Brian Barnhart called a hell of a good race, and it's showing that they're meshing really well already. And I think to your point of what you said previously, is we've always seen Arrow McLaren have the hiccup weekend, or they're out to line. Well, what if Christian Lundgaard is raising that floor where the worst result that team can expect is an 8th? And yeah, maybe they're not going to go out and win, 3 or 4 races, but as we talked about, all you got to do is stay consistent. I mean, 1 year Alex Palou's worst finish was 8th, right? So yep. I'm not saying Christian Lundgaard's going to go off and do that, but you have to wonder if this resets the floor. I think Arrow McLaren, while they're still waiting on Nolan Siegel to kind of grow and develop, they found it's funny, we've got all these F1 comps today, but Arrow McLaren has Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and I think they've got a similar combo that they can feel comfortable with on the IndyCar side. And, so you look at this, and I think here's the other question. I know, again, still a long way to go. Still got to figure out how Christian does on ovals, but let's just call this outright. Scott McLaughlin, Will Power, and Joseph Newgarden are 8th, 9th, 10th in points. They're more than a race behind Alex Palou. Christian Lundgaard and Pato are 3rd and 6th.
3rd and 5th, I think.
No, Dixon's 5th.
Oh, nope. Never mind then.
Is Christian and or Pato Chevrolet's best hope for the champion to make a championship push? I mean, are we already looking at this going, there's no more double points at Indy, right? There's no more double points in the season finale. Like, do we look at this and already say, like, if it's going to be if a bow tie is going to challenge the Honda juggernaut of Ganassi, or if Kirkwood lights fire and goes, he's also in a Honda. I mean, do we look at this and go, well, your best championship hopeful, if you're a bow tie supporter, is going to come out of Aaron McLaren?
It's possible. Part of it will come down to how Team Penske both can work on just avoiding these, frankly, head scratching mistakes that they've had on race weekends, both in the car in terms of speed with qualifying, and just the weird seatbelt issues, or short filling on a pit stop. You've got to be flawless, and Team Penske has not quite been that. So I think it's a valid question. I'll be surprised if Christian Lundgaard is quite up to Pato's form on ovals right away. But I think it's possible that he's a really strong performer. And I mean, through these first couple races of the year, we've certainly seen that either Pato or Lundgaard, if not both, have had the top speed in the Chevy camp, or at least darn close to it, I guess. When you look at St. Pete, Joseph was probably right there in tops. So we'll see. Still a long season to go, but certainly those two Aaron McLaren cars have proved, I think, that the ceiling in Chevy world so far has been on their side at the moment. I mean, one thing that's interesting when you look at some of these names that are atop the championship, that starts getting you wondering, now that we have two more seats in Formula One world on the grid for 2026, with Cadillac F1's formal approval by both the FIA and FOM Liberty Media for next season. I mean, it makes you wonder if there could be someone from the IndyCar world that could take one of those two seats. I think it's been stated in various ways and seems pretty clear, and also frankly makes a lot of sense, that you would want at least one of your drivers to have legitimate Formula One experience, like a Valtteri Bottas or a Sergio Perez, even Guan Yu Zhou, who's been in the series for 2 or 3 years now, and whose manager for a long time is Graham Loudon, who is the team principal at Cadillac F1. But I mean, I look at the top of this field: Alex Palou, Kyle Kirkwood, Christian Lundgaard, Pato O'Ward, Colton Herta. I mean, ultimately, some of it comes down to super license points, some of it comes down to age, some of it comes down to what teams see just beyond race performances, in the data, and talking to a driver from talking to folks that have been around them in their careers. But I would love more than anything for one of those guys to get a chance to hop into a Formula One car. And yes, not in 2026, but give them a couple years and show what this current era of IndyCar drivers, what one of the top guys in this sport would be able to do in Formula One once Cadillac F1 gets its feet under them, which is going to take some time, frankly. But I don't think there's any reason why one of those guys can't prove that a top IndyCar guy can be firmly in the thick of things in Formula One with a few years' time. I think there's a lot of intriguing names that, for one, you could make an argument could or should be in the mix seriously for one of those seats at Cadillac next year.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, and I always like to just make lists, right? And you look at this, and it's very obvious what the list is, at least for the first three candidates, right? Everyone is going to look at Alex Palou, Colton Herta, and Pato O'Ward. And if you're Cadillac, your General Motors brand, maybe you think about plucking Palou, because, I mean, you look at what he's doing on the IndyCar side and what he does with the Japanese manufacturer and Honda, and you're like, we could take him away from the enemy, and maybe the bow tie benefits from that. And you run into a scenario where, if Christian Lundgaard continues to come into his own, and that program with Pato raises, And obviously, we don't expect Penske to continue to have the issues that they've had. Eventually, they will find their way. You can change the balance of the scales by doing that. Now, is that likely? I have no idea. I would be stunned. But, the other, and we talked about this off pre-podcast, off air, but I know it's unlikely, but I think you've got to have some mention of Kyle Kirkwood and Christian Lundgaard in there. I think Christian Lundgaard with his F2 background, and I know you were quick to point out to me, like, well, you got to think about the window for the super license points, and I 100% get it. But, one, he's with the right team, and Lundgaard is. And so I think that becomes a good consideration. But, and I look at Kirkwood. I mean, there was at one point his dominance in the junior formula categories. And he wasn't just running in the Road to Indy when it was known as the Road to Indy. He was also running in, the F4 Americas, F3 Americas, and kicking everyone's ass doing that. And at one point, it looked like he was possibly going to go a route that could see him, follow into maybe a Haas development type of thing at one point. I mean, obviously it never materialized, never happened, but there was thought that could be an avenue for him, because you kind of wondered where he was going to break into things in an IndyCar side. But, I know that he loves IndyCar racing. I know that he loves living stateside too. And he's got a good friend in Logan Sargent, and he got to watch how that materialized for Logan. So I don't know if he would be that attracted to the F1 side of things these days. But I think you look at that though, and you got to wonder, if you're looking at these candidates for the Cadillac team, and if anyone's coming from IndyCar land, only two that I just mentioned are connected to General Motors by being bow tie guys. Everyone else is Honda. I mean, unless you're going to try to plug Scott McLaughlin in there, and I don't see that happening as much as that would be fun as hell to see. But it's just, the reality is it's probably going to be Palou or Colton, if we're being realistic. And, it'll be interesting to see, though, if they wanted to bring somebody else in, and maybe that's a reserve, or maybe that's, a different dynamic. But, I think here's the other argument. As much as Palou is doing what he's doing, at some point, do you want to be? I mean, I'm not saying that he's not challenged by IndyCar by any stretch, because he's very quick to be humble about it and say that he still isn't even maximizing himself 10/10 of everything. But at some point, do you look at these results and go, I want to be challenged in a different way. I want something more. And he just wants to go off because it's a different challenge, because there's always the avenue of coming back, right? We've seen drivers leave and come back. And I mean, granted, the pre-career is always better than the post-career, but nonetheless, it is very possible.
So when I look at the names that we mentioned currently in IndyCar that would seem like they make some level of sense for a Formula One seat next year, I think they kind of fall into maybe three categories, at least the top names. I think Alex Palou makes the most sense. He has been far and away the most successful driver in this paddock ever since he stepped into a Chip Ganassi racing car. He's won 3 championships in 4 years. He's well on his way, already winning 4 championships in 5 years, a level of dominance that we have not seen in the sport, certainly since reunification. And it's been quite a long time since we've seen anything close to that, if ever, before the split. I'd have to go back and dig up some stats to see if we have anyone that's won 4 championships in 5 years before 1996, but I don't think it has happened in quite some time if it has. I think Colton Herta is the most likely candidate among these, with the caveat that he has to finish at minimum of 4th place in the championship in order to seal off his super license quandary. I think 4th place gets you 10 points. He's sitting on, if memory serves me right, 31 points out of his last 2 years. I believe that's a 10th place in 2023 and a 2nd place in 2024. He could get there if he finished 5th. I think it would require one free practice one participation, which would not be hard to do. I can't imagine. I'm sure, between, say, Ferrari, for example, whose engines they're going to be using next year, Ferrari has, every reason to want Cadillac to be at least somewhat solid. And if they think, Colton is the best option to be driving their, driving a Ferrari powered car next year, then I could certainly see a, Ferrari or a Haas or someone else give a Colton an opportunity to finish that off. But I don't think it's any guarantee that he's going to finish 5th in the championship. I mean, Colton does have a 2nd place performance last year, but his last couple of years before that, he'd been, I think, in the 9th, 10th range. So that's by no means a guaranteed thing.
He's 15 points out of 4th right now, with Felix at 88 and he's at 73.
So not out of the realm of possibility, but not automatic at the same time. And I think one that, maybe kind of someone that is kind of in between some of those things, someone that both makes sense and could seem somewhat likely, frankly, someone who is qualified, is Pato O'Ward. Pato O'Ward has a super license off of his performances in the championship. I think he had, when he achieved his, I think it was after the 2023 season, he was able to fill in as for McLaren F1's reserve driver because he had reached that 40-point threshold. He had 3 seasons in a 4-season span due to the pandemic that got him to that 40-point threshold after 2023. And he's been McLaren F1's reserve driver, test driver ever since then. He's participated in a couple FP1s, and I imagine we'll probably do so again at some point later on this year. Beyond that, I think it's a stretch. Kirkwood is a fun name to think about, and he would require going to, he'd have to go and win a championship in order to finish off the super license thing. And I don't know that F1 is going to make any grand exceptions to Cadillac, with the fact that there are names out there that would qualify, and I don't know that F1 is going to make some grand exception if Kirkwood, say, finishes 3rd or 4th in the championship and is still 20 points off. I don't see something like that happening. So he would have to wow us. He, of course, is that American name that Cadillac would love. So if Kyle Kirkwood goes and wins an IndyCar championship and Colton Herta doesn't qualify, and it's really important to Cadillac to have that American name, maybe Kirkwood gets it. I think that's a bit of a long shot. I think what you would get, say, in Christian Lundgaard, if Christian Lundgaard qualifies, he's in the same boat. He would need, I think, at minimum a second, probably with some FP1 participation or a 1st place finish in the championship. What you would get out of Christian Lundgaard, benefit-wise, is he spent several years in F2. He, was climbing the ladder from the bottom rung all the way up to F2 for several seasons. He'd been a reserve driver, I think, for Alpine, if memory served me correctly.
And he's the youngest out of everybody. He's 23.
That's right. Youngest guy, most runway behind, or, most runway in front of him, and has significant experience in Formula One, either Formula One type cars on a simulator or Formula 2 cars, whatever you want to say. I'm sure he was doing some test driving. So, in a simulator, lots of work in the Formula One world in a Formula One car. He knows these tracks probably better than any of these guys do. Now, we're going to be in a new era of Formula One with this next set of technical regulations starting next year. So it's not like he's got, experience in this car in this era of technical regulations, but that's a wild card out there that could make some sense. I think the least likely among all of these. I think Pato is really interesting in the fact that he is for his entire career in IndyCar been in that Chevy camp. Let's say he goes and wins an Indy 500. If he wins a championship and an Indy 500 and you're Cadillac and you're like, man, Pato Mania is at its peak here in the United States. We are an American team. Pato has lived in the United States longer than he ever lived in Mexico. He's a Mexican driver. Both his parents are from Mexico. He started his life there, but he's certainly spent a lot of time in the U.S. and has a rabid American fan base. I think Pato could be really cool in that car. Frankly, I talked to him about that last week, and there's a story posted on IndyStar.com with comments from Pato saying that he has not spoken with Cadillac, but would welcome their call, and said even he imagines that there will be some conversations that will be had at least at some level once they get a little bit farther down the road. My guess is on this F1 topic before we tie things off, I'm assuming that Cadillac probably signs a veteran here before too long, and then they kind of wait and see how this IndyCar season pans out. Is Colton going to be in the top 4 and be super license eligible? Is there a way that they can convince Alex Palou to come over? If neither of those two work out, can they work out something with Pato Award? And if none of those work out, they could sign. Maybe you have a Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas team at Cadillac F1. It would be a little bit of a bummer for a team that really wants to be wholly American and really tune into this American F1 fan base that maybe doesn't quite do that. But those are also names that, the casual F1, say, Drive to Survive level fan has gotten pretty used to watching Formula One the last couple of years. Bottas and Perez being the B drivers to that classic title race with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen in 2021. The last thing I'll note on this, Alex Palou was asked about his F1 aspirations in the bullpen Friday at Long Beach. And it's really hard to figure out where exactly he stands on this. Anytime he's asked about this, he makes a point to say, look, that was really important to me earlier in my career. I made a big push for it, as you guys all know. But ultimately, I'm really happy here in IndyCar. And I followed up that question, or that answer of Alex's, with the question, if you got he also said that he has not heard from anyone at Cadillac F1. Was important for him to point that out. And so I asked him, if they call or when they call, would you be interested? And he has gotten much more media trained over the last couple of years and essentially said, hey, if I said no, that's going to be a big deal and they're never going to come, which makes me think there's some interest. Because if there was no interest, he would just say, no, I'm fine. I'm really happy. If there wasn't part of his mind that wondered, maybe depending on what they offer me, or maybe what the situation is, or maybe what I learn about the development and the direction and the 5-year plan of this team, maybe I might think about it. He also said, of course, if I say yes, then that's going to turn into a firestorm. So I have really no interest in providing an answer either way. Yeah, I will say, I didn't tweet this out. I knowing how social media works, I thought this would probably get turned into a story that's bigger than it is, and it's also a little nugget and a little gift for folks who listen to our podcast. Alex Palou's lawyers from Europe, who are representing him and fighting his case against McLaren and Air McLaren in UK commercial court, were on hand at the Long Beach Grand Prix weekend. And as I walked by the row of hospitality units on Sunday, probably an hour and a half before the race, they had made their way into the hospitality unit of Andretti Global, and we're talking to Dan Tauris. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's a hell of a thing to say at the end. I was just that's a better nugget than what I had, which is the fact that you can't forget that Alex Palou has some familiarity with Cadillac because of his time with the few races he did with an IMSA and even the 24 hours of Le Mans back in 2024. So there's some Cadillac ties, but certainly a bigger tie when you talk about lawyers walking in and talking to Dan Tauris. I mean, if you've got a lawsuit to pay for, it's a hell of a way to pay for it, as an F1 paycheck pays a little bit more than an IndyCar one.
That's the rumor around, and I've I certainly can't say that I know this definitively, but the understanding, I think, from lots of folks in the paddock is that Chip Ganassi is let's say, supporting Alex very heavily in his fight against Zach Brown and McLaren Racing. I mean, the way it's been framed to me by a couple sources is that, as they had gone through their negotiation phase to try and settle this before it eventually moves its way into an actual court proceeding coming this fall after this IndyCar season is over with, that this past off season when there were negotiations going back and forth, that it was actually Chip that very well may have been the money behind any settlement offer that Alex had made. Those were obviously unsuccessful. And so now they go to court, and we'll ultimately see what a judge or a jury decides on this. Certainly if the decision is Alex owes McLaren $20 million, Alex doesn't have $20 million. So is Chip going to front that money and Alex pays him back and races for free for several years? I don't know. Does Alex pay for part of it and Chip pays for part of it, and he pays Chip part of it back over years? I don't know. But I can guarantee you one thing. If Alex leaves for Cadillac F1 to go race following this season, and it requires some sort of a buyout before his Chip Ganassi Racing contract is over at the end of next season, I feel pretty confident in saying that Chip Ganassi is not going to be paying Alex's legal fees once we get this thing all said and done. So that would then probably come to, hey, Dan Taurus, do you both have an F1 seat, and can you help front me some money to get this legal battle settled with Zach and McLaren? I don't know. We'll have to see how that pans out. But yeah, all interesting stuff. Pato, I believe I've been told, if he were to get an F1 offer and McLaren could not match it, or could not give him a seat, and they are not able to do that at the moment, both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris are under contract through, I think, at least 2027, if not 2028. From what I have seen reporting wise, then Pato would be free to go to an F1 team if he were to get that offer. So both those guys, even though they're under contract at their current places 4 times, there are amounts of money that could get them out of those if Cadillac so chooses. We will have to see ultimately what Cadillac decides to do.
I know that we are up against the clock, but this just came out. I know you wanted to touch on this, even though there was maybe a couple of other things to touch on, but the more pressing thing. So the TV number for this past weekend for the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach, Fox got a 552,000 viewers for Sunday's race, which is up from 307,000 for last year's race that was on USA Network. That is via Adam Stern. To compare that, FS1 got a 2.054 million viewers for Sunday's Cup race at Bristol. And then the Masters, no surprise, just beat down everyone with 12.99 million. So I'm not necessarily delighted to see that number on the TV count. That's not, we were wondering after St. Pete and Thermal, because they were just total polar opposites, where we would fall on the spectrum with Long Beach, being that it is the second biggest race on the calendar to the Indy 500. And that's not necessarily the most promising number. It doesn't help when you go head-to-head with the Masters, but look, you're going to go head-to-head with something whenever you're on weekends. And, man, what's your immediate takeaway with that?
I'm making some calls or text to confirm that number from Adam, but don't have any reason to doubt it. That is shockingly bad. Really, there will be attempts to spin this at some point. In my mind, at some point, even though there's always going to be something on TV that you're up against, whether it's, Sunday was the final day of the NBA regular season. It was the final round of the Masters, with an epic performance, both good and bad, from Rory McIlroy, a fan favorite. And you also had the closing laps of Bristol's NASCAR's Bristol Cup race. But at some point, you have to make yourself the thing that people choose to watch over other things that are on TV. Very rarely are you going to be the only major sporting event on Sunday afternoon TV. And this is bad. I will go back once we finish off this podcast. I'm going to dive into numbers and figure out where this ranks in recent IndyCar history in terms of a network number. But I thought thermal was about as low as you could have ever hoped to be on network, and that floor got even lower with this number.
I mean, you got called out a little bit by Graham for making it sound like the sky was falling, and you know, I mean, it looks like it's falling.
Yeah. Those tens of millions of dollars that you spent in the ad time that Fox gave to IndyCar on the Super Bowl, you know, the hundreds of times that we have seen those commercials on various Fox platforms since, it's tough. And we will get Long Beach attendance numbers later today, and we will find out that Long Beach had the highest attendance in probably a couple decades from that race. And that is a great sign. We are continuing to see race attendance, I think, pretty consistently over the last couple of years on many, not all, races on the IndyCar calendar continue to grow. And that's important, but not everyone can get to, you know, not everyone can attend races. You know, these races aren't always in markets where, you know, people can easily get to. You know, we've got
there's one race you can't even really attend if we're
and I mean, you've got so many in the Midwest. You know, we'll get to this summer stretch of Midwest races where, you know, where you've got fans that are having to decide, you know, do I go to Mid Ohio? Do I go to Detroit? Do I go to Road America? Do I go to Milwaukee? Do I go to Nashville? Do I go to the road course race, the 500? I can't go to all these. But the important thing is you have to have a baseline of folks that make you appointment television, and that number for the sport cannot be a little over, you know, 550.
I expected 1.5, not 5. Like,
so I was saying, I think you have to at minimum be above thermal, and you need to shooting for 1 million, knowing that you were up against the Masters and NASCAR and everything was going to be tough, but that would be an incredible achievement. This is, I don't know. This is live podcasting, live news. I'm struggling to find words to adequately describe how disappointing I think this is, but
it's real bad too when you think about what some of the new things that we saw over the weekend with Fox, right? They brought in the driver cam, the driver's eye cam. That was awesome, where you're literally seeing how bumpy and wild it is to run around the streets of Long Beach. That was a cool feature.
Mm-hmm.
The pre-race graphics were better with the introductions. Like there was improvements to the broadcast as a whole, and you know, but obviously, I mean, those don't matter if nobody's seeing it. So it's, you know, golly, man, I know last time was March Madness. This time it's the Masters. I mean, it's really setting things up for the fact that, you know, you're hoping Barber can be, I don't know what Barber's up against, but off the top of my head, but.
Well, here's the thing, like Barber is not Barber is a great race. It's a fantastic venue. We've had some good, interesting races there the last couple of years, but Barber is not one of your, you know, to steal a NASCAR term, Barber's not one of your 2 quote unquote crown jewel races on the calendar.
Nope.
Long Beach is. Long Beach was celebrating its 50th anniversary on the schedule, a number in terms of consecutive races that nothing else consecutive. Can't technically say consecutive because of the pandemic, but let's leave the pandemic out of it and say that Long Beach had been on IndyCar's schedule for the last 40 years, minus a worldwide global pandemic. Just so much momentum, so much name recognition, the glitz and the glamour of running around, the LA area along the ocean, and you just can't have this if you are IndyCar, and frankly, if you're Fox executives are going to be looking at this and saying, we put how many tens of millions of dollars into trying to boost the awareness of your sport and your biggest drivers. If I'm Fox, you're starting to decide now they're not going to have another Super Bowl here in the next couple of years, but you're having to start and think, what are we going to get out of spending tens of millions more in putting really cool commercials together and giving those commercials airtime on our networks in place of, places that will actually give us money for them, and investing in technology that is going to differentiate IndyCar broadcasts from other racing broadcasts, and hiring top level talent like Will Buxton and James Hinchcliffe from other places that would love to have them employed, namely Formula One. I think this is proving that it is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money to get IndyCar to where Penske Entertainment likes to position IndyCar as where it actually is. TV ratings are not everything, but they are a lot of things. Teams, the amount of sponsorship that teams get for their seasons are based off of the previous year or the previous couple years TV numbers. And if I'm a team and I am staring down millions in increases for new car, new engine, new lots of stuff that it's coming down the pipeline in a couple of years, if I'm looking at my books that have already gone up 20 to 30% or more over the last year or two, with hybrid and personnel costs rising and other things, I'm a little nervous. Wondering when this is going to turn, because we heard all summer and all off season, Fox is going to take this, Fox is going to take IndyCar to the moon. And clearly that's not the case. And what that answer is, I'm not sure. It's not a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet out there like Formula One had with Drive to Survive. And I think this is proving, yes, again, 3 races in, that this is not going to be an easy thing to take IndyCar to that next level. And I think, frankly, it affirms Penske Entertainment does not, and not like to, and probably never would on the record, admit Formula One is second most popular form of racing in the United States. NASCAR's first. Frankly, in lots of weekends, NASCAR Xfinity is probably second or third. Formula One is probably third, second from a overall popularity standpoint. IndyCar is not second. That's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I'll say this is that one, you, me, everybody else that loves and covers this sport hates that number. It's not like we look at that and we smile and we think, haha. It's very much complete opposite. It's demoralizing because we've had a lot of time invested in this sport. We've got a lot of friends in the paddock and there's a lot of good people. And seeing a number like this on a regular basis is going to be cataclysmic for the sport if it continues. It's as simple as that. And there's got to be, as you said, there's no silver bullet. There's no magic pill. Fox can carry this only so far. The sport has got to find a way to carry the rest. That's That's just all there is to it. And you're really putting yourself into a hole, hoping, no black. I don't remember if the blackout's going to be lifted for the Indy 500 since it's Fox or not, or any of that other stuff. But all I'll say is you're putting yourself in a hole that you're going to have a banger Indy 500 with some all-time record numbers, because future potential manufacturer suitors that you're talking to get involved in the sport, retaining someone like Honda, not to mention, like you just mentioned with the teams, other B2B sponsors trying to get involved. It's the rise in attendance is wonderful, and you're hoping the rise in attendance will shift to where those guys and girls and kids focus and tune in on Barber and help raise the floor a little bit. But I mean, this is, man, that's rough. There's no other way to put it. It's been a great show with a lot of good stuff. The fun thing that you said with Palou and Cadillac, but that's unfortunately a hell of a sour note to close on.
Yeah, I will shout out Fox because, again, I always say this, and I'm not always able to. I still want to go back and watch the race broadcast again before I make some overarching comments on the broadcast as a whole. But they brought some great elements, and they prove that they are paying attention, and they are working really hard behind the scenes to continue to make this product better. I thought the touch on Sunday ahead of the green flag, when they're doing the run through the field, stealing that element from football games that we've seen before, not only having the drivers say their names, but having the car in the livery that they are racing that day, is super great for either new fans who are trying to familiarize themselves with what car their favorite driver runs, or frankly for longtime fans that aren't caught up with the spotter's guide on liveries that change from a week to week basis. I think that's a great touch. The driver's eye cam that we had heard about even before the start of the season, I think 4 drivers had it on race day on Sunday. I really hope we see more of that. That was a great touch. I think when you have that driver's eye cam along with the additional data that we see pulled from the car that's on the screen, I think it's really neat. I think it looks like in some ways, a cleaner broadcast. I'm not super thrilled with the standings bar on the left side of the screen. I think there are ways that could be better. It's got more going on than NBC's did. But I think the way it's organized and presented from NBC, I preferred a little bit more. I think it was easier to read the gaps, or in qualifying, the times that drivers had. Certainly in qualifying, you're still really missing the gaps that guys either have to 6th place or to 1st when you're talking about are guys going to advance or not. Still really missing that on qualifying. But it is... the presentation was better on Sunday. I still need to listen back to get a better sense of just how well the booth is meshing, and how well, frankly, a director that had never been involved in racing before, how they are doing with matching what's being talked about to what's being actually shown on the screen. So I will reserve my thoughts on that for another day. But it goes to show you, races just being on network TV and even Super Bowl ads and putting a lot behind your star drivers are not everything. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, to get IndyCar to, frankly, where F1 is, and where they had a rather, as far as I am concerned, loosely following Formula One. Unimportant is probably too strong a term, but the Bahrain Grand Prix, or the Saudi Arabian, it was the Bahrain Grand Prix on Sunday, didn't have like any super thrilling storyline going into it. You had a McLaren car on pole that went on to win the race without too much struggle, and you have Max Verstappen kind of off the pace, Lando Norris somewhat in the mix, but they averaged, I think, what was it, 1.3 million for their broadcast. Again, F1 has the advantage of not really running up against anything else in that morning time slot, at least in the US. I think that race started at 8 a.m. on the Pacific where I was, and 11 a.m. Eastern. So you're getting on TV before anything else is from a sports standpoint, certainly before the Masters had ramped up. But that's not a time that IndyCar can run on a Sunday, and that's the F1's advantage to being a worldwide sport and the way that they kind of schedule and organize their races. They run at a time where no one else is running. They have that lack of competition. And yes, if you're Penske Entertainment and you can IndyCar, you can say, yeah, we were up against, an otherworldly, interesting Masters broadcast and the end of NASCAR at Bristol, which I know wasn't this year, but a lot of years is a really interesting and thrilling, fascinating race down to the wire on who's going to pull that out, and one of those that a lot of NASCAR fans circle on the calendar. But you got to be the thing that people are interested in and want to watch. You will got to be appointment television. Your drivers have to build brands to where they solely get someone interested in Pato Award. And because I'm a Pato Award fan, I make IndyCar appointment television, and we do not have enough of that right now.
I got nothing to add. I mean,
we've got other things we could talk about, but I think we'll save for another show. We will. I know Joey and I have talked about offline, and we will continue to see if we can put together a little bit of an Indy 500 preview type show off of next week's open test. I know we'll learn a lot. There'll be a lot to talk about on what we see from cars on track as that process gets rolling. We hope to maybe have a show for you after that before we get to the race at Barber, which is wild that the next race we're going to have is going to be in the month of May. And then we're going to really get rolling. Really excited to have this platform to be able to chat on and opine with and argue and have discussions with Joey on once we get into the month of May, because there's going to be so much to talk about between championship discussions. Who's going to be in contention for the 500? Can Joseph go back to back to back? In silly season that's frankly going to start to ramp up once we get into next month. So really excited to have a lot more episodes and a lot more let's say frequent number once we get this IndyCar season rolling and once we get the month of May rolling. So stay tuned for more episodes here. If you have any thoughts, any things you want us to talk about, questions you want us to answer, feel free to shoot us messages on X or comment on our podcast platforms. Again, you can obviously listen to this wherever you get your podcasts, on indystar.com, on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Really appreciate those that have been listening to this and helping us kind of re-spark this IndyStar podcast. Really have enjoyed doing this with you over these last couple months, Joey, and really looking forward to what we have in store for the next couple months as this IndyCar season gets rolling.
Peace.